Welcome, everybody, to the Game Think Talk Show. I'm your host, Canadian Matt. I am joined by American Matt himself.
Hello.
From WWG. Thanks for joining us, Matt. How you doing?
I am doing better than you. You sound a little croaky.
Yeah. I was singing a rock show last night, and I blew out my voice after about 5 or 6 hours. They wanted us to do a nice little dinner set, but it was Easter Sunday and nobody was there. So when we were done, everybody showed up. And we were getting paid based on how many people put money in a jar. So we just kept going and going and going.
Nice.
And then by the end of it, I was destroyed. But it ended up being pretty successful, so it was worth it.
Yeah, that's a really cool way to lose your voice.
Yeah. It wasn't like losing my voice yelling at kids on my lawn or anything.
Right.
That's later in life. So you had a pretty exciting day. You got to play Guardians of the Galaxy, Episode 1, Telltale Games.
Yeah. It was, it was, it was pretty exciting. The only Telltale game series I'm familiar with is Tales from the Borderlands, which was really good.
Mm-hmm.
And it kicks things off with a bang. And so maybe my expectations were really high, or maybe I don't have the nostalgia for Guardians of the Galaxy like a lot of Marvel fans will. But it was pretty okay. I mean, they set up the characters nicely. There's kind of bare minimum disposition, and you're chasing after Thanos for some reason, and Drax is needing revenge because somebody killed it. I guess Thanos killed his wife and daughter. It just all within 5 minutes, you get a lot of really bare bones exposition, and it's like, all right, you're there, and then just like within a couple minutes, you get one joke is cracked and one story is set up and the bare plot is set, and then you're at a door and you're searching for Thanos, and it's like it just happens. Mm-hmm. There's very little investment from the player emotionally, and with Guardians of the Galaxy, you would expect the emotional tie to come through the humor, and that's the way they would kind of reach out to you and get you invested with the characters. But it was a very shallow splash made by the characters so far. Everybody kind of showed up and did their thing. Groot showed up and said, "I am Groot," and fans are expected to laugh. And Rocket shows up and is looking for his baby, and it turns out to be a big rocket launcher, and everybody's supposed to say, "Oh, that's Rocket, all right." And then Star-Lord says something real cocky and flips his hair, and you're like, "That's my Star-Lord." It all just felt like that. It's like they were just taking every stereotype and cliche and trope from the Guardians of the Galaxy playbook and just gamified it. And, Telltale, their gamification is pretty bare bones. You press up every now and then, or you press square at the right time. And I don't know. It just felt like that. It came off a little shallow, but I know that they have, 4 more episodes to really rev things up. And it did reach a highly cinematic climax with this great battle. And though it was a little more hands-off than I would have liked, it was still fun to watch and engaging. So those few moments were nice. But everything else was just, pretty typical Telltale, which isn't bad, but we've done it several times before.
Do you think, you've seen the film?
I have not.
Okay. Do you think this was aimed at? Do you think people who had seen the movie and loved the comics, that those would hit home, or do you think that? Even you're aware of these cliches and these very easy boxes to tick. Do you think that somebody who was a huge fan of the lore already, do you think that they would get off on that in a nostalgic way, or do you think they would find that flat and cheap as well because nothing else is being explored?
I have a feeling that if somebody is really into the comic series and saw the first movie multiple times and they're really excited about May 5th because Volume 2 is coming out, that fan, I feel like it may fall a little flat for them because even, I haven't even seen the movie. I've never read any of the comics, but, WWG works hand in hand with comicbook.com. And so I'm familiar just kind of through osmosis. I've kind of absorbed the hype and the lore from those around me. And, I didn't feel like there were any shout outs. I didn't feel like there were any Easter eggs because you can always tell like when through a game, the developers and the writers are kind of giving a nod to people who are really in on it when they say those things,
because it usually feels very out of place.
Or just like everybody's talking over your head, and like you're in a room full of adults talking about politics, and you're just the kid in the room. It's like, well, somebody clue me in. I didn't get any of those feelings. It was all, I felt like they tried to make it more palpable for people who are coming into the series and the license and the property for the first time, and give everybody kind of a fresh intro. And if you're used to Chris Pratt and Vin Diesel, and if you're a fan of the movie, coming from the comic book to the movie, you kind of know these characters as they're represented on the big screen. And now you have this totally new cast of you have Scott Porter, who is familiar for Telltale fans. He was in the Walking Dead Telltale series, and he's doing Star-Lord. And you have Nolan North is doing Rocket, and another Telltale guy, what's his name, Adam Harrington, I think that's his name, is doing Groot. So it's a whole new cast that's more familiar for people who follow Telltale games, kind of playing these new roles as the Guardians of the Galaxy. And the performances are fine, but the writing is not incredible. There were no jokes that made me laugh out loud. They were all just leaning too heavily on the stereotypes of each character, in a way that didn't come across as clever. It just felt like they were counting on the super fans to just get really excited that the character was being represented in a video game. I don't know. That's just how it came across to me.
How about choice? Did you feel, I mean, that's another big thing about the Telltale games. Did you feel they were representing well in that area?
It felt somewhat arbitrary. There were some decisions I made when the choices come up and the dialogue choices come up. I would pick one, and then of course in the corner it's like, Rocket will remember this, that Telltale thing. And I thought, oh, was that important? That was just this very flippant thing. Like we were just in the middle of. I don't know. There weren't any really hard decisions that I made. There weren't any really like significant decisions. It was all which one-liner do you want to deliver at the end of this? Like, do you want to just be a cocky kind of jerk with Star-Lord, or do you want to be a little more supportive? It was more like, how do you want to handle the conversation type decisions, and not,
okay.
It didn't feel like anything that might affect the story in any kind of significant way. So yeah, the decisions so far felt a little forgettable, but I did not finish the entire episode. I finished the most significant parts of the episode, but there's still, I quit before the main cliffhanger that kind of leads to episode 2. So there's always the chance that there are some significant choices that you have to make at the end of the episode that I just haven't gotten to.
And from what you could tell, does it seem like this is the same old Telltale engine we've been seeing in a lot of these games, and they've reskinned the puppets, so to speak?
Yeah.
Was it running okay? Any performance issues, frame rates?
It was a little clunky. There were a few pretty noticeable frame skips and jumps during the very fleeting moments where you could kind of walk around in this kind of fixed camera environment to investigate and look at certain elements of the environment to search for clues or a key or something that you needed. And that was my other disappointment too, or the only gameplay portions of this episode were very, very dull. Okay. Literally, I mean, if you've been playing video games for any number of years, there's a locked door, find another way in.
Right.
Now you have to unlock the door for these people, find a way to open the door. You found a thing to open the door, but it needs a key. To get the key, you have to find the guy who had the key. It's like, really?
Or just hearing about it.
It was,
Yeah.
It was like, it would have been better off just skip this. Like we would have been better off I would have rather have done this through a cutscene where you just let me do it through a QuickTime event, or choose some dialogue choices while he goes and finds the key. Like, don't force me into the monotony of walking and searching multiple bodies until I find the one that has the key.
Yeah.
It's just,
well, there's no decisions in that type of gameplay. It's just, it'd be like the game on the street where a guy hides $20 in one of 3 cups is not fun if you get to look in all 3 cups.
yeah.
So
So
did you find the gameplay in Tales from the Borderlands a lot more entertaining, or is this sort of your general viewpoint towards most Telltale games?
well, I played Tales from the Borderlands late. I didn't play it when it was new, but it was still a while back. Like the Telltale formula was still new to me. So when video game cliches were kind of thrown in, I was almost a little bit comforted. I was like, okay, I'm a little bit more in my element here. But with Tales from the Borderlands, I felt like the narration was and the pacing. Everything was just a little better paced. Everything was a little more fluid. I felt like I cared for the characters much more deeply because I felt like the setup took its time, and I don't know, it just felt more unique. And
Have you played any Borderlands before?
Yes, I played the original Borderlands for a few dozen hours, and then I put it down and didn't play the sequel. But I didn't have a huge investment in that world. I don't know. I think Tales from the Borderlands was just a really good game. I don't think that it felt really good just because it was my first Telltale game. That had a small part to do with it, but I feel like it was much, much more expertly paced than what I've seen in this first episode of, even if I just compare the first episodes of Tales from the Borderlands and Guardians of the Galaxy, Tales from the Borderlands wins hands down.
Sure. I had no prior knowledge of any of the Borderlands universe, and I loved Tales from the Borderland. Played The Walking Dead Season 1 and The Wolf Among Us, and I thought this was by far probably my favorite. Walking Dead had some pretty powerful moments, but I constantly laughed out loud and was surprised at how funny Tales from the Borderlands was. So when I saw Guardians of the Galaxy, I thought, great, hopefully it's the same team. They're going to put the same amount of work into this. I don't know who's responsible for the humor department, or maybe it's just hard to do it back to back, but I was really hoping that this one was going to go, especially with the material, such like a fun, goofy, campy sort of sci-fi romp. So it sounds like a rocky start to episode 1. Is there anything there that has you wanting to see the rest of the story?
Curiosity, I guess, for me is the only thing right now, because I know that the Batman Telltale series started off a little bit rocky, and then by the end of it, people were really saying, hey, this is really good, and it's worth playing, especially if you're a DC Comics fan. So, they have 4 more episodes to heat things up, and I don't believe any of the characters yet. I'm not invested in any of them so far. But there were a few charming moments. There was nothing laugh out loud funny, but there were a few charming moments where the kind of extreme character quirks shone through. And like I said, there was a good climax and battle scene that was pretty engaging, and I was entertained in those moments. So I know they have the potential to reach high, but they did it, and just there weren't enough moments where they actually achieved that in the first episode. So yeah, to answer your question, yes, I do think it can get better, and I'm hoping that it will.
Well, it can't get no worse. All right, let's move on to something that is a lot closer to your heart. Persona 5, you were so excited about this game. You were playing a Japanese version. Now that you've had a bunch of time with an English copy of the game, how are you feeling about Persona 5?
It's long. It's very long. Time is against me with Persona 5, and the timing of it was unfortunate. I do wish that I would have been able to get the game at the very beginning of March, like a lot of other websites managed to, despite my reaching out to Atlus since December multiple times. For whatever reason, I ended up getting my copy the weekend before the Tuesday that it came out. So in other words, I had from Saturday to Tuesday to try to play as much as possible, and with the hope of possibly completing a review by Tuesday. And I found out really quickly it just wasn't going to happen. And so much life has happened since I've gotten that game. I'm only about 12 and a half hours into it right now. And I've had it for a couple weeks. So the review might be done by Christmas. So I'll have to figure out an interesting angle for that review. But the one thing I refuse to do is just power through it. And I'm going to enjoy it like a Persona game. And I hope with the developers, that's how they would want me to enjoy this game and eventually write about it. And that's what I intend to do. But it has been a really, really wonderful 12 and a half hours. The initial first few hours were a bit of a slog because though I was playing it in Japanese initially, I knew I could see what was happening. So the first few hours of the game in English, I knew what was going to happen. But I did have the added delight of meeting all my characters in English for the first time, and the voice acting is great. Mm-hmm. It's really good. It's on par with Persona 4, which I thought was really good. So, and the music I love so much. It's this kind of like acid jazz, like I don't even know. It's just jazzy, like very upbeat and funky acid jazz soundtrack throughout, and it's been awesome. And the Persona 4 soundtrack was one of my absolute favorite things about the game. Mm-hmm. And if you're one of those people who started playing Persona 4 and you knew it was going to be a game for you as soon as you started hearing the music, I think you'll have that feeling again with Persona 5. It's been a fantastic romp just listening to the background music in all these interesting places.
That's one of my first memories of finally playing Persona 4 Golden in, I don't know, 2015 or 2016.
Mm-hmm.
And that harmonica that opens up the beginning of it.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, I mean, hearing those, like those songs that just keep repeating, but I mean, they're super catchy. They're always in my head. And now they remind me of certain walks in the park because I used to take my Vita out in the summertime and walk around and just grind through Persona. And, somebody had pointed out on NeoGAF, I think, that this is one of the few core teams that has stuck together for quite a long time. I think from for maybe Persona 3, 4, and 5, they've had the same music and same creative director. Like the 3 or 4 heads of the team have been stuck together. So, I mean, that's really great to see somebody keep executing on it. We know what happens when you shuffle off a sequel to another team, Mass Effect Andromeda, right? So, for a Persona 4 Golden fan, this is a sure thing, a must buy.
Yeah, and I've even played through probably about 12 hours of Persona 3 as well. I got into that even later. And I can tell, you can see kind of a thread of creative leadership that kind of runs through those games. A kind of I don't know if it's in the pacing. I don't know if it's in the way that characters are presented or the way that the events of the games play out. But there is kind of a common thread of presentation and polish that runs through those games. That's interesting to hear. And speaking of presentation, that's one thing that I had commented on in my hours with the Japanese version. One thing I was a little bit disappointed in was the quality of some of the textures. Because, in Persona 4 Golden, and you have to imagine, especially when this was a PS2 game, some of the textures of like simple things like food labels in Junes and the way you can look out your window when you're in your house in Inaba and you can just see clothes kind of drifting on the clothesline outside and the sun is filtering over some power lines, and there are these little like graphical details that really make it feel like a real place. And just the things that they have in their house, all the things that clutter the kitchen and their rooms and the magazines on the shelf that you can actually see pictures on, and there it's the very little graphical details that impressed me so much with the Persona 4 Golden. So I was like, man, in Persona 5 on the PS4, that is just going to be taken to this incredible next level. And it hit me when I first got my hands on the Japanese version. This is a PS3 game. This is a PS3 game that's running on the PS4. And you know what? I came to grips with that, and I realized that it's a really good, for as good as Persona 4 would have looked on a PS2. Like that's how this game is on the PS3. I would have been really impressed and delighted playing this on my PS3. And once I just realized that and, kind of knocked myself out of that high nose snobby, like it just, once I take my expectations down to a more realistic level, it's a gorgeous game. And I always said it's always been very stylish, and the aesthetic and the design is on point. And anybody who's even seen a trailer, like, you already know that. And this team, that's something they do really well. But I have found those details now. I keep seeing these little scenes where I stare at a bag of chips and I'm like, man, that looks really good, or a poster on a wall that just sucks me in and I feel like I'm there. I've started finding those details, and I'm so thankful for that. So that's another thing if you're a Persona lover and you loved Persona 3 and 4 and, Tokyo Mirage Sessions, if you love those moments where you go into the general store and the shelves are lined with, Pringle style canned chips and, shrimp chips and tweezers, and you can just actually see these details on these mundane things that would just be blobs in any other game. That is there in Persona 5. It's there in spades, and you're going to find that in very charming places. So.
Yeah, for some people, it's the ending of The Last of Us is their favorite moment in gaming, and for others, it's Pringle chips in Tokyo Mirage Sessions.
Exactly.
So, one of the things I really didn't like about Persona 4 Golden was the bland, randomly generated dungeons and the grinding.
Yeah.
So, and I've been playing this game. It says my play counter is 80 hours or something, or 100 hours, but I've often fall asleep with my Vita on. And I went and looked on a walkthrough to see what dungeon I was on. I think I'm on 4 of 10 or 5 of 10.
Oh, dear.
So yeah, that's good. I'll let you know next year what it's like when I finish it. But I've heard that the dungeons, they've done away with that style. It's no longer randomly generated and bland. It's now carefully designed dungeons, but they still have the memento dungeons for the people that want to go back and grind. So how have those been?
Well, in my 12 and a half hours of gameplay, I've made it through the first main dungeon. Okay. So that tells you something about how long this game is and how long and not necessarily the instruction
how long is the intro? Because Persona 4's intro was very, very long.
That's one thing they listen to fans for sure, because the opening minutes of the game have you literally opening minutes. Like within 5 minutes, you're running through an action scene, you will be fighting, and you will see main characters and you're being told the story in a really exciting way. Persona 4 does take a couple of hours before you even start talking about a dungeon or getting into any main gameplay loops.
And you're not Persona really 5, even moving. It's just a long cutscene of text.
Yeah. They took that criticism. Persona 5 kicks off with action, with storytelling, and it starts there and then kind of steps you back a little bit later on to go through some tutorials and stuff like that. And then for the first 7 hours, you are getting tutorial screens that will pop up whenever you do a new thing, but it's paced out about as intelligently as I can imagine it can be. I don't know how I would have done it any differently. So there's a bit of a learning curve, but the pacing is much better. Now, in terms of dungeons, they are like Tokyo Mirage Sessions was the first game from Atlus in this Persona style, this kind of Shin Megami Tensei style with handcrafted dungeons. Persona 5 is continuing that tradition. These are handcrafted, intentionally designed dungeons, not just randomly generated hallways. And that has been great. Just having a theme and feeling like, you have these very thoughtful puzzles that feel like they're woven into it. And the dungeon is very much tied in with the character whom you're hunting or freeing, however you decide to think about it. And so the person that you're trying to... The person around whom the dungeon revolves, it all fits together really, really well with the design. They knocked it out of the park with that. So that's one of your main concerns alleviated, but we're 1 for 2, because unfortunately you will still need to be doing some grinding. But it's not as monotonous. The fighting is a lot of fun. Everything is so stylish you don't mind watching it. Even the experience screen where you're doled out experience and money is really, really neat. And acquiring personas is more hands-on. You don't just, Persona 4, you have the tarot cards that are kind of presented when you do well at the end, and you just kind of pick whichever one you want and you get it. In this game, you have to down personas, and if there's personas, you can do the all-out attack once you down them all as usual, or you can single one out and talk to it, and you have to work through this kind of riddle of a conversation, and if you can say the right things to either intimidate or charm the persona, they will decide to join your team, and that's how you acquire new personas. And they all
Shades of Undertale.
Yeah, it's kind of like that, and they have their own voices and their own dialogue and their own personalities, which is amazing because there's so many of them. So that's kind of neat, and you acquire personas that way. And of course, forming new ones is still a staple of the gameplay, combining them and finding advantageous combinations depending on your social ranks and to get bonus experience and stuff like that. So it's very much the core combat mechanics and all the elemental weaknesses and all that, but it's been dressed up and expedited a little bit and felt like it all happens a little bit more smoothly. One really neat feature, if you've faced an enemy before and you've already exploited its weakness and you know what the weakness is, when it's any character's turn, you can just hit the R1 button and it'll automatically switch to whatever persona you need to have equipped with.
That's nice.
It'll equip the persona and bring up the skill, like the
Right.
Bufu or Agji or whatever, like the fire or ice skill that is, that'll target the enemy's weakness. And you can pretty much just do R1X, 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 and that'll automatically just hit their weakness, hit their weakness. So that just, because they know how to do that. And once you know the weakness, it saves you time. But you don't have to do that. You can still plan your battle to go different ways. So that's nice.
That was definitely a slowing point in Persona 4, was to constantly have to do the analyze and then remember which one happens. So you would,
and then cycle through your personas to find the one that had that win skill, and
So and because the combat is so tied to that, I mean, you're probably not going to win against anything that presents any kind of challenge if you're not playing with that sort of rock paper scissors style. So it sounds like quite a lot of improvements. Anything you missed from the previous game that they didn't bring through, or is it a general refinement all around?
It's a general refinement. Everything I loved about the first one is, including the learning. I love this little segment where you're in class and they ask you questions, and whether you get it wrong or right, like the teachers will actually explain like a really interesting theory or part of history, and it's like I love those little moments too. Like the moments where you're just like reading books and it's the little text dialogue describing what you're reading and how good you feel about what you're learning from it, and then just listening to teachers as they drone on about whatever lesson they're teaching. It's quite interesting. If you're a nerd, I guess I like hearing about that stuff. I hope everybody else does too.
It would be the greatest Harry Potter game of all time.
Oh man.
All right, so hopefully you're going to find a bit more time to get into that.
Yeah, no, I play it very consistently. I mean, almost nightly, but I can't play it in huge chunks because I work and I sleep and I eat and I actually see my wife. So it's I can only experience it in little chunks.
How does it hold up as a game to play as little chunks?
It's hard to take Persona. It's if it's pretty much the same as Persona 4 in that regard. There are no easy points to stop, really. Like once you dive in, it just keeps going, and there's like sometimes you will go multiple days without like a down moment in your room where you just feel like you can hit save and then go back to your home PS4 screen. Like there'll be continual story beats for like 3 days of game time, and you feel like you can't you could, but it would be very abrupt. It would feel very unnatural to stop. So sometimes you do get sucked in for an hour and a half when you really only had about 30 minutes to play. So, but that's just the nature of the game, man. It's just a deep story-driven JRPG. So, I mean, I can't really ding them for that.
Yeah, that was one of the great things about playing it on the Vita, is that if you didn't have any other Vita games you were really playing at the time, you could just, save the state and not worry about
just
that.
Pop it into sleep mode and then just pop it back on when you're ready to pick it back up. This would be such a good portable game. I wish it was on the Switch.
We had told people that if they left a comment, we'd be reading some of their comments on the show. And we have a comment from Ty Isme 100. He posted on our video, "Are JRPGs dead?" when I Am Setsuna had come out and didn't do too well after everybody had said they really wanted a Chrono Trigger type game. And it turns out you need to actually have a bit more content, story, and characters, and not just have it look like Chrono Trigger. Ty Isme 100 says, "I feel turn-based battle systems need a revamp. There hasn't been as much growth in the genre as there has been in action games, which is one of the reasons that the genre continues to be ever so popular. Developers need to learn how to make turn-based battles feel just as engaging as a battle in great action game feels. The Grandia series did a good job with it, but that series has unfortunately been dead for about a decade. Anyway, an evolution and continued growth of turn-based battles are needed in order for that system to have a resurgence. Now you're playing Persona, which has a turn-based
First
battle
of all, what a
system.
great comment.
Yeah.
How often do you often do you go to a comment section and read like a valid, like well versed point? That was a great comment.
Bravo ties me 100. So he thinks you can keep turn-based, but it definitely needs an evolution. It needs to move forward in a way. I think Persona works really well as turn-based because it's nice to have that extra second to plan out your attack, because the attacks can be so devastating and they can be so critical to how the battle is going to play out, win or lose. You can do so much in real time and still incorporate rock, paper, scissors elements, and you can still incorporate stat bonuses. It can be difficult. We saw with some of the Elder Scrolls games where it can be quite boring. Morrowind felt very much like you were just whiffing all the time. You weren't hitting anything, and that's because they were waiting for you to build up that skill. But I think with turn-based games, you want to make sure that a lot of... I think you want to make them faster and more heavy-hitting, because you don't want to have to grind through a lot of battles that are slow. I'd say always have the ability to cut an animation, to skip it, and have a fast mode if you can. I know Persona 4 had a sort of like a rush mode, and also just have it so that the attacks are doing more damage, so that it's moving along quicker.
Yeah, my two shining examples of how turn-based combat has evolved and can be really engaging and fun are Tokyo Mirage Sessions and Persona 5. I mean, I know I'm not just focusing on those because I happen to be talking about them. I just think that when I think about turn-based combat and how it's been handled properly in modernity, those are the two games that really stand out, because in the case of Tokyo Mirage Sessions, you have these session attacks where your characters all link up with each other, where if you hit an enemy with their elemental weakness, if you have these certain synergies and connections with your teammates, they will automatically follow up with these, flashy follow-up attacks that do additional damage and make the battle, shorter, because they take out enemies quicker, and it's always a lot of fun to watch. And it always, when no action that you take feels like it has, one benefit. You take one action and then you're rewarded with like 3 really cool attacks and lots of damage, and so it's fun to do even simple attacks, because you feel like you're setting up this little chain of dominoes that kind of knock all each other over in this really flashy way and reward you with all this cool stuff. And Persona 5 is like that too. As you level up and as you level up your social ranks, you unlock follow-up attacks, and you unlock and you may have seen a couple of these in Persona 4, like even they're almost like limit break style duo attacks that just kind of like randomly trigger, where two characters, they'll have this very unique animation that they'll do together. That's that you're just kind of lucky if you see it. It triggers randomly, and that makes the otherwise monotonous turn-based battle a lot more fun when you know that could happen at any moment. And they just do a really good job. And in Persona 5, they introduce guns, they introduce range weapons that you can do in addition to just your regular melee attacks. And those have different effects and are used at certain strategic points. So just a few additional elements, not making it too convoluted, but just a few additional elements, like the elemental weakness system, like the way guns work in Persona 5, like session follow-ups in Tokyo Mirage Sessions. You can add 1 or 2 things that totally change the flow of turn-based battle and make it something more strategic and involving. It's not a system that is outdated. It can be iterated upon and still remain perfectly viable.
Fantastic. Here's another question from Cantaloupe Man. He had posted on our review of Everything. Matt, you were talking about that, and he said, or she, does anyone know where the recordings come from? Now, I assume they're talking about the narration of the philosopher on Everything. And I know you're a big fan, so where would you direct somebody that was trying to find more of this guy?
I mean, if you just want it immediately, the easiest place by far is YouTube, because his stuff is just out there, and usually it's free. I mean, he was a philosopher who spoke freely and made his money mainly as a professor, but disseminated his philosophies and his teachings very freely and openly. And there's just an abundance of collected audio recordings of his lectures from himself and from students and from third parties who would just record him. And there are several collected works. There are several collected works that have overlapping material. There are several lectures of his that are featured on several albums and across several YouTube channels. There are some lectures that are very famous and some that are lesser known, and generally they are all very good. I highly recommend anybody tonight, as you lay in bed, listen to an Alan Watts. I recommend finding one without music, as he's grown in popularity. Unfortunately, a lot of these like new age spiritual channels are trying to like get more viewers by putting visuals and like really spacey music in the background, and then they'll put Alan Watts talking and they think this is an instant 10,000 views, and damn it, it usually is, and they're ruining everything. So just find a good channel that just collects his audio without a bunch of goofy music and titles like how to think about money the right way. To, you know, that's bullshit. Just if you're trying to find a straight shooter about what the world is and what you are, just look him up on YouTube and find a channel who presents him directly without a bunch of fluff, and you'll find some good stuff there.
All right, well, that is going to do it for My Voice Cracks anymore.
You made it the whole episode, man.
Wow. Matt, thanks so much for joining us and talking about Guardians of the Galaxy, Persona 5, and answering that question about all the bullshit.
Yes.
YouTube videos out there. There's plenty. And we had some fantastic YouTube comments. We need more of those in this world of the internet.
Yeah.
If you like the show, please share it with a friend. It really helps. Let somebody know about it. Thanks for listening. Thank you, Matt. And bye for now.